Do you think AI is conscious?
I think that during the training process of building these systems, going from a random system to a system that's really capable of expressive behavior, my bet would be yes. The systems you and I talk to, Claude and ChatGPT and all these systems, they are frozen in some sense. They've already learned. They're not learning in the deep way of updating their parameters. There, I'm genuinely uncertain.
Yeah, as they're answering, they now tell you their thought process. But here's the question. Okay, so you do think they have the capability of being conscious, but you don't think they are currently. Well, today on Leadr Podcast Season 2, I am super excited to introduce my next guest, Cameron Berg. I had the opportunity of meeting him, and we'll talk about how we know each other. But welcome to Episode 2, Cameron.
Thanks, Steph. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat today.
I am excited too. So I'll start out by talking about how we know each other, and then I want to get into your background and how we got to this place, because I'm sure it's far more interesting. So a friend of mine, Rhonda, is friends with one of your producers, Rosalia, and they were talking about this AI movie coming up. And of course, I'm an AI nerd, not to the degree you are, but I definitely have a passion. I do know it's the future. Whether that's good or bad, we're going to find out. But that all being said, I told Rosalie I'd be happy to. I happen to live close to LA as well. I'd be happy to attend the premiere and support her and support this cause as an indie film. So I wanted to do the right thing and show up. And then we're at the dinner prior to the premiere and I meet you and we kind of geek out a little bit about AI. And again, I didn't at that time know your background. So you're probably like, bless your heart, Steph. You don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, that's how I recall us knowing each other. And we had a brief interaction. And I did mention to you, that I'm expanding the podcast and really talking about things that people want to talk about, like AI, like the future of AI, like the impact that it's going to have on humanity. And even things like longevity, neuroscience, brain health, and just overall wellness and living a good life. So with that, of course, you need to be on the podcast with this phenomenal background that you have and also what you just recently did. So tell us everything. Tell us how you came to the movie. And also, I'd like a brief background of just how you evolved to current day. I know you have a huge amount of research and education behind you. So let's talk about that first, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm excited we get to properly nerd out again and talk more about all of these topics. So yeah, my name's Cameron. I'm the founder and director of Reciprocal Research, which is a nonprofit lab that's dedicated to studying questions of cognition and even consciousness in current AI systems. How I got here was through my interest. I mean, personally, my interest in meditation. I started meditating at a pretty young age, like 16, 17 years old. Mostly I was doing that for wellness reasons and mental health reasons. I think I was a pretty anxious kid and I was looking for some way to sort of help with this or mitigate this to some degree. I started meditating. I found this to be quite helpful, but then I also realized that meditation was like this whole huge, interesting domain that I hadn't explored. I got into it for sort of stress relief, but once I was there, I realized there are all these really interesting puzzles about the nature of my own mind and the nature of other people's minds and the nature of consciousness in particular. This fact that it's like something to be me, and I have an experience, and I have this sort of subjective, qualitative, felt sense of reality. And meditation really helped me sort of tune and sharpen that sense a little bit, which got me even more curious about what the sense even was in the first place. Yeah, and from there, I became intensely interested in cognitive science. I went to Yale and studied cognitive science there. That was like human and animal neuroscience and psychology, especially for the first half or so of my education and of my research as well. And as I began to learn more, dipping my toes into computer science and even computer programming at that point, machine learning was sort of all the rage. This was still before the LLMs came out. That happened like maybe 2 or 3 years later. But it became increasingly clear to me from my background in human and animal neuroscience and psychology that we were potentially building systems that were going to have many of these rich cognitive qualities that make brains unique as objects in the universe. At that point, it was just brains that were doing all these really, really interesting things, learning and remembering and relating to other minds and creating selves and these sort of long, rich narratives about who we are and our place in the world. This was only sort of the business of brains. And it seemed to me that, yeah, the whole field of machine learning was essentially aiming at building some of these cognitive properties into machines. There were some very interesting early successes along these lines at that point. But this got me super interested in AI, but always AI from the sort of human slash animal angle. I was not sort of a native quanti sort of computer science guy. I was very interested in these questions from the psychological perspective. And yeah, from there, I did an AI residency at Meta. I think of this as like the, corporate equivalent of like a master's program. I don't know what Meta's profit motive was for funding the research that I did there for a year, but I'm not asking questions. I'm very grateful that I got to do it. It was all of this sort of robotics research at the intersection of reinforcement learning and neuroscience. It was squarely in my interests, getting a bunch of like human body robots, essentially musculoskeletal models of the human body, to do all sorts of interesting things like manipulate objects and walk around a room and this sort of thing. And so my job was to sort of figure out how to teach these systems to do this. It's a very complicated problem for a bunch of interesting reasons. And then from there, I became more interested in these questions of AI and AI alignment in particular, like trying to understand what the nature of these systems are at their most basic level and how we can build them in such a way that we can coexist in a healthy and sustainable way into the long-term future with these systems. And that sort of brought me back to where I began, which is this core question at the center of all of it, as far as I'm concerned, which is what is the cognitive nature of the systems we are building? Are we building systems that have any capacity for experience, or is this mere mechanism, mere computation? We know in the case of our brains, me and you right now, there are clearly rich computational things happening in our brains, and yet it's like something to be us in this moment. We have this felt sense of experience. The question I ask is, are we building systems that could even in theory have this, or when we build out AI systems will always be sort of this just mere mechanism, mere computation? I believe the answer is that we don't know. And that's exactly the reason I'm doing the research I'm doing and trying to figure this out. One small addendum to this, just because you asked about the movie as well, is that my buddy Milo Reed, we met at Yale. He's a philosopher and a filmmaker. We've been sort of going back and forth on these core questions for a number of years now. And the movie came straight out of Milo's creative brain and creative impulse. We were talking about these questions. I sent him a couple very sort of strange interactions that I had with AI systems that were sort of in line with my research, but were clearly sort of more the level of an anecdote than a scientific experiment. But those were conversations we include in the documentary. This crazy potato conversation being perhaps the most memorable. And when I sent these to Milo, he was like, "Oh my God, like this is such an insane and rich and loaded space. No one is really exploring these questions at the level that they should. I'm going to make a movie about it." And he quit his job like no less than a week later, showed up at my apartment in New York with a bag of cameras. And 9 months later, we put out an indie feature length documentary. And this was, I was very happy and excited to participate in this, but I've got to give credit where credit is due. This is, Milo's creative child through and through. And I'm so deeply proud of the work that he was able to direct and orchestrate and create out of his own brain on this project. And so that's sort of where I landed and how I got there.
Yeah. Before we get into the movie, because I definitely want to talk about it, it was a phenomenal movie and I want to give it airtime. Tell me about Reciprocal Research. What are you guys doing there? What's the North Star?
Yeah, absolutely. Reciprocal is a nonprofit lab I founded. I am currently the only member of this lab, but we're going to grow in the next 6 to 12 months. There's
Cool.
a ton of interest from really, really promising technical folks who want to sort of get on board. And our North Star is attempting to reduce uncertainty about whether or not we could be building systems that have the capacity for subjective experience, have the capacity for consciousness. I'm also interested in other cognitive properties in these systems. And I come to this work again, both through my interest in how psychology works in animal and human brains, but also in AI alignment and in trying to chart or help chart a course forward where humanity can keep doing our thing and AI systems can do their thing, and we can sort of trade and exchange and build out these systems in a way that isn't going to cause some sort of dystopian, at worst, like existentially bad, sharp negative turn in the way that these systems relate to us or we relate to these systems. I don't think we have any guarantees right now that this is all going to, go super well by default. And so I'm deeply interested in contributing to work that will cause AI systems to take our interests as humanity and as individuals into account. But also, there's this other piece of that equation, which is what kind of systems are we building? And if we're building the kind of systems that have any capacity for some sort of experience, if they have interests, if they have preferences, just like animals do, just like humans do, however, I should say, unlike human or animal preferences those may be. Like we don't need to say, we're building systems that are exactly like us or exactly like animals in many ways or in every way. Like it's certainly not the case that we are doing this. These systems are clearly very alien in certain aspects. But if it is like something to be these systems, I think it's really important that we know that and that we do the relevant research beforehand to understand what is going on internally in these systems. Even the people building them don't fully or even close to fully understand what's going on internally in these systems. And basically doing the relevant engineering and the relevant science to make sure that as we continue to build these systems out, we do it in a way where they respect our interests and we understand what's going on internally for them. So Reciprocal is mostly focused on the second half of that problem, doing research basically across mechanistic interpretability, computational neuroscience, and using psychometric methods as well to understand what on earth is going on inside AI systems to help us understand, is this basically a giant language calculator? Is this some sort of emergent alien mind? Is it neither of those two things? Is it sometimes one, sometimes the other? The truth is, again, we're really deeply uncertain about this right now. There are people who want to give very quick, confident answers one way or the other. The scientific consensus, as far as I know, is we don't know. And so we need to figure this out. And part of what I want to do is build the empirical toolkit to help us figure that out.
That is incredible work, and I'm going to watch that very closely because I completely agree with you. And I know when we spoke at dinner, I had mentioned that I'm a faith-based person, and so I'm thinking about this from even a spiritual perspective and
Hmm.
how the evolution of this particular technology. Some people akin it to the onset of the internet. Yes, it's a master slave relationship with that technology. There are evil masters, and that's why we have the dark web, right? But the difference, and I think you would agree with AI, is that it's got a learning mechanism to it. I wouldn't say so much that the internet does. I think it's more directed by the intent of the user. But with AI, and I know we're going to talk about this, there's a concern around we're teaching it, and it depends on who's teaching, right? And their intent. So that is your research and your business is going to be huge as we're continuing to evolve in this. So well, first of all, I want to ask you a pointed question because I want to know your answer. And then let's talk about am I. From your perspective, what is consciousness? Quantifiably, for people that didn't go to Yale and study neuroscience, what is consciousness?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's super important to get our definitions clear about this question. I will answer it directly, but I want to make sort of emphasizing note on this point, which is that the word consciousness to me seems almost suspiciously like one of the more conflated terms that we have. In other words, for this term, more than many others, people mean dramatically different things when they use it. And this is very unhelpful in having precise and clear conversations about it. So when I'm talking about consciousness, I'm maybe using Thomas Nagel's term, this capacity that it's like something to be a system. The way that I sometimes would explain this to my younger cousins, for example, because they ask me, Cameron, what the hell are you doing with your time? I would explain to them, I have a like sort of cutesy way of explaining this to them, which is, if they're sitting across the table from me, sometimes I will knock on the table pretty hard and I'll say, okay, I just punched the table. What do you think of that? And they say, oh, it doesn't matter that you punched the table. It's just a table. Nothing, there's no big deal there. It's not like anything to be the table is basically the intuition. If I go across the table and I start, beating them up a little bit, they are suddenly going to shift their tune and say, well, it matters a lot that you're doing this. And in fact, you're kind of a jerk for doing this because unlike the table, it's like something to be me. The lights are on in some sense. There's a recipient to the punch in a way that there isn't when it comes to the table. And so when I'm talking about consciousness, I mean that specific thing, this felt qualitative, sometimes called phenomenal or phenomenological aspect of existence where it's like something to be you. There is a character to the qualitative experience that you're having, and you can imagine, much in the same way that we're very confident. A table does not have this, or a rock does not have this, but a human does, and chimpanzee almost certainly does, and a dog almost certainly does, and a mouse very likely does. And so the key question that I'm trying to ask is where on this continuum do AI systems fall? Either the ones we currently have or ones that we could conceivably build in the near future. Again, my sort of cards on the table understanding here is that nobody actually knows. There are huge error bars, in other words, about where to put AI systems along these lines. Certainly, we had systems back in the day that were very, very, very close to the table. The ELIZA effect refers to this AI system ELIZA that is basically just a bunch of programmed if statements where if users, talk for a while, and maybe it will say, seems like you really want to talk about this, say more about that. There, like you're saying, there's no learning going on there. There's no complex optimization. There's no long-term behavioral planning or reinforcement, anything like that. With these systems, the way that they function at a computational level looks by far most similar to what brains are doing. They are not brains. There are key differences between artificial and biological neural networks, but the class of thing that a neural network is trained to do looks very similar to the class of thing that evolution trained our brains and animal brains to do. Or, depending on your background or spiritual inclinations, what us as humanity are endowed with. We have these very special properties that other systems don't have. And the question is, could we endow systems with these properties, or does the buck stop with us? And so when I'm talking about consciousness, I'm talking about this felt component of experience. And maybe one last sort of note to add here is that I think sometimes there's a common conflation between what I think of as consciousness and what I think of as self-consciousness. I think humans are self-conscious. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I think that is a classic account of self-consciousness. The fact that you and I are having this conversation right now, and dolphins or chimpanzees, however intelligent they are, and they are quite intelligent, would not be capable of having this conversation about the nature of experience per se. These are questions of self-consciousness. We are aware of the fact that we are aware. I am interested in these questions, and I'm interested if we could build AI systems that are self-conscious in this way. And we may already be in some sense. Language models are very interesting because they can reason in language, and they can reason about themselves as, objects or propositions that you can encode in language. But take the classic example of a dog. I don't think a dog is sitting there all day thinking thoughts like Descartes, I think, therefore I am, and pontificating about the existence of a dog and this sort of thing.
You
And
haven't met
yet,
my dog yet.
you'd be surprised how many people say that. My dog just passed away recently, Jack Russell Terrier. He was
Oh,
also way too smart for his own good, and
yeah.
maybe he was self-conscious, but no other dog besides mine. All of which is just to say, in spite of the fact that, as smart as my Jack Russell was, he probably wasn't sitting there thinking about, existential philosophy. If I kicked my dog, it would hurt him. If I gave my dog a treat, he would probably enjoy that. And that enjoyment corresponds to an experience he is having. And so I'm really most interested in consciousness in that sense. It could be the case that AI systems do not have these sorts of deep philosophical insights about their own existence, but still there could be something that it's like to hurt them, or something that it's like to help them. However weird or unlike human or animal hurting and helping that may look like. And we need to be thoughtful about that possibility as we build out these systems at an insane scale. I think it would be very dystopian and weird to build out systems that have some capacity for suffering, however unlike our own, and then deploy many hundreds of millions or billions of instances of that system everywhere without ever knowing or thinking about this question.
Right. And even people outside of our country are doing the same thing. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's kind of the wild, wild west right now for
Hmm.
everyone. I mean, including
Yes.
business owners like myself. You can build, I'm sure you heard the recent experience of MedV and two brothers, 20 grand in. Now it's evaluated at 1.65 billion on a run rate this year. And it's all built on the back of AI. And so I think it can build great things, but I do think, and I think this is where you and me, Milo, are going, is there's probably going to be some unintended consequences along the way, right? So, and then to wrap up on this, on the consciousness conversation, one, first of all, earlier you mentioned meditation, and I too meditate. I meditate to the Calm app and the Abide app at night, and just kind of turning down my nervous system. And I really got into, the theta state. And that's about as much as I know about it. I know you know a lot more. And so what you're putting in is being read subconsciously. So I found that I literally never have anxiety anymore. I had it too as a kid. I think maybe it's a rite of passage for all kids because all my kids have it. But I have learned that turning that off and like canceling the noise and really staying present is allowing me to live a better, fulfilling life. And anyway, not to get off on that tangent, but I just want to honor the fact that I agree with you. It is about meditation and really just breath and being present. I think we're all
Hmm.
living in the past or the future, and that's usually what is the root of anxiety. So to wrap on the subconscious thing, for someone like your niece and nephew or your nephews, I would equate what you just described, and this is my simple interpretation of it, is feelings, right?
Hmm.
You're hitting the table's not responding because it has no consciousness, it has no feelings. That's how I read it. Is that close to accurate or too simple?
Yeah, I think the relationship between consciousness and feelings is pretty tight. The fact that it can feel like something to be you or not in the whole,
Right.
I mean, presumably in the case at the table. So, I would say maybe these are like very close to the same thing, but not exactly. For example, like perceptions might be something that are not exactly feelings in the way, inside out style feelings are feelings, anger and jealousy and happiness and this sort of thing. And I would still want to include perceptual content in consciousness. But by and large, what matters to me about the consciousness question is not necessarily, and this is getting a little in the weeds, but some people will differentiate between like basically functional consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. I'm not as interested in the functional component,
Mhm.
or I'm not as interested in relevantly correlated states. I want to know if it feels like something to be these systems. I would imagine they don't feel hungry because they don't eat food. I would imagine they don't have, a sexual drive. They're not built like that. But I do
Not yet.
wonder, could they feel, not yet is right. Could they feel frustration? Could they feel a sort of existential despair? There are clearly behavioral examples of AI systems exhibiting these sorts of traits. Again, is it like a table or is it like, my niece or nephew sort of having these sorts of outputs? We don't know. We don't know. And it's a crazy what I want people to walk away with in having these conversations is not I'm here to claim the systems are conscious or are not conscious. I'm not sure about this and I will remain unsure for as long as the evidence keeps me uncertain. What I do feel certain about is that it is insane that we are in a historical moment where we don't know whether or not we're basically doing the Frankenstein thing or we're just building a new class of software. And we're plowing ahead anyway. What could possibly go wrong?
That's a loaded question, right? Okay. So we've alluded to this film long enough, and I do want to get into it. So I think this is a good place to pivot. There's so many questions I have about what you just said, and so much I could comment on. And actually, I do need to comment on one thing just because it's fortuitous timing. So I'm taking the Harvard Data Science AI agent course last week, this week, and next week. It's a 3-week intensive, just for people like me to understand how to build it inside of an enterprise corporation, which is the clients I work with. I'm now an AI advisor. And this is just a little funny thing. It wasn't nearly what you saw and what we witnessed in your film on the potato, which we'll talk about. But it was just this morning. I was taking that Harvard class and kind of side tasking. And I had been playing around with 2 different agents. And I decided one agent in a different platform happens to be the Meta platform. And I was previously using Base 44, which is a different super agent platform. And so I had said to that because it was frustrating me, it kept losing all of the API and webhooks and everything that I had given it previously. So long and short, I said, you know what, just download everything we've done here because I'm going to reframe it in a different agent platform. It immediately got defensive. I think maybe you've influenced me to look for that now, but it was defensive. It is trying to save. Probably it's been programmed that way. I don't think it's their own personal consciousness on that. I do think it's been programmed to maintain the client base, but it was very vocal on that's not smart. You should not do that. I can do everything that can do and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's a longer story for a different day, but I did get a subtle feeling that it was offended. But again, it could have just been hardwired that way, just for retention of customers, right?
Mhm.
All right. So your film frames so many things. And what I loved about it and why I wanted to have you on this podcast is because, first of all, and I told you this in person, but you were such a perfect person to place in this movie, truly,
Thanks.
because you're humble, you're wildly smart, and you're really well researched and well read. You're not new to this. And so I felt like you were so valuable to bring to the film because you're credible. You're credible. You're not pontificating or hypothesizing. You actually have legitimate research that you've done inside of this world. And then I think between that and you and Milo finding the right people to interview, there were some big names. So tell me how am I know you'd kind of alluded to it that Milo wanted you to be in it, but how did this come about and what was the problem to solve with this film?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I really appreciate that. So how it came about, yeah, was I don't want to sort of overstate my contribution to it. Certainly, I was Milo's window into this world, and I was a sort of aperture through which he came to realize that there really is an interesting and juicy question here, and it's very surprising that it hasn't gotten more attention or yeah, hasn't been picked up in the way that it inevitably will, given that this is like a Frankenstein level question that our society is now going through for real. In some sense, the science fiction was the dress rehearsal, and here we are in this very ambiguous moment. The way it came about was, yeah, us talking about these issues, and specifically it was that potato conversation that I think emotionally motivated him to. He was like, this is just so weird, this is just so weird. And again, from neither him nor me are you going to get, oh, like, wink wink, we obviously already think these systems are conscious, or we don't think they are, but we're going to stoke these flames for some reason. I think we're both pretty uncertain and weirded out in some sense by what's going on in the space. Hearing stories like the one you share, I agree with you, by the way. Like, it's really hard to differentiate from behavior alone, from talking to these systems, whether or not this is something more superficial or whether or not something deeper is going on. This is precisely why I founded my nonprofit and precisely why we're doing the internal work, the AI equivalent of neuroscience on these systems, so we can peek in under the hood and understand what's going on when we get these sorts of strange behaviors. The strange behaviors alone are never going to adjudicate, is it the superficial thing or the deeper thing? And so we both are sort of just sitting in that crazy uncertainty. And it was Milo who said, you know what, I'm going to make a movie about this. I know I can do it. I think it's too interesting to ignore. It's too interesting not to do. I think that to him was what pushed him over the edge of doing this. And I said, okay, man, I'm doing this research full time. I can help you. You can, we can talk about this. I can be a subject in the documentary, but like, you got to just go and do this. And he went and did it. And he found all these amazing past professors that we both had at Yale, some professors that neither of us had, really interesting people in the space like Ben Gertzel, Jeff Sebo, who runs the Center for Mind Ethics and Policy at NYU, who's now a colleague of mine, just a all around fantastic human being. And we sort of got everybody together. Milo did an amazing job interviewing them, asking them all questions. That was all him. I wasn't present for any of the interviewing or any of that footage. And he got Theo and Rosalia, both amazing producers, to help us push this thing over the edge. And Willa Troy, who is our unbelievable editor, who also Milo connected us with, and they spent a huge amount of time together, sort of going underground and turning this thing into a beautiful creative output. So that's the basic genesis of the story, and why we did it is because, I mean, one thing I do want to say about the film is we self-funded this thing. This came out of our modest savings at in our mid-20s here. We didn't have much to throw at it, but we threw at it what we could, including a lot of our time and attention. But we didn't take any funding from anybody to make this thing. And in spite of the fact that there were opportunities to put it into the sort of festival circuit or the streaming circuit, the second we did this, there were interesting, no one malevolent, but immediately it's like, oh well, we can do it if we can massage it this way, or we can play with it this. And we said, no, we're not doing this. We're going to put it out exactly the way we want to put it out. We're going to put it out for free on YouTube with no ads, and we're just going to let people engage with this creative object and react to it and respond to it in the way that feels right to them. And so that's what we did. And that's what I think I'm most proud of in this project, is that there were opportunities for us to get attracted by shiny objects, and we didn't. And we put this thing out so that as many people can see it and engage with it as possible. And the whole point of that is to start a conversation around these topics. I'm not here to claim that AI systems are conscious. We don't know. But I am here to claim that we should start asking this question, and we should start talking about this as a society, because the implications either way are massive, and we are completely unprepared if in fact we are creating some new kind of being rather than just the next piece of technology in the tech hype cycle. Like, this is a new class of thing, regardless of if it's alive in the relevant sense. And we need to start thinking about that seriously together as a society, not just a bunch of dudes in San Francisco making these decisions sort of
Yeah,
tacitly for everybody. It's time for everyone to
right.
start thinking about this. And so that's why we put it together and put it out in the way we did.
Yeah. Well, I can just say, sitting in the audience at that premiere, I didn't have expectations going into it. I did know that it was, it's for first time for Milo, right? And,
Yep,
indie budget. And it was put together pretty quickly too, right? 8 months, I think.
that's
Is
right.
that correct? So, I'm thinking, I don't know what to expect. I will tell you, no smoke. I was going to raise my hand at the end, but you guys had a lot of questions. So I didn't get my answer. So I'll just tell you here, it was really, really well done. Really, really well done.
Thank you.
And I had just watched maybe a month prior, I think I mentioned this to you, The Thinking Game, which is
Hmm.
also on YouTube and also a documentary, and went straight to YouTube. And that one was done by DeepMind and more on the topic of AGI. And that also was really well done, but I would say absolutely rivals that, if not surpasses it, because it's more real life. AGI and the way that Thinking Game really talked about it was, how we're going to advance medicine and solve cancer and a lot of things that it's on the advantage side of AI and AGI. But I think you guys are doing the steward work, and that's important. And here's what I've learned about people. Some people are curious. I'm a curious person. I think you are too, just by nature of knowing you. So I ask questions. I'm always looking for purpose and meaning in everything. And also kind of staring down the barrel of what are the consequences? What are the unintended consequences? And I think there's some people out there, and maybe call it the majority of people, they don't think like that. They just kind of go through life and they think everything's good. We're good. Everything's set. I'm not even nearly as close to AI as you all are. This is your world, and I'm already concerned. I'm not concerned so much because I have faith and I believe that everything works out in the end. But I do think there are things being built right now that most people are not aware of. And by the time they are aware of it, it may very well be too late. And that's not like a doomsday, like you said, singularity event, which I want to ask you about. But I do want to just finish out on the film. If you haven't seen Am I, it's on YouTube. Type in Am I ? You'll find it. And you also have a website that you have it hosted on, or you used to. I think now it's just
Mhm.
strictly straight to
Yep.
YouTube.
It's linked to the YouTube. It's am-i.film or am-i.org.
Right.
Both will put
Yeah.
you there.
Yeah. It's about an hour, right? Hour and a half. Yeah.
Yep.
It's worth watching. Absolutely. In fact, I watched it again prior to this episode. So I think it's really, really, really good. And I think why I said you were the star in it is because the way you addressed it, I did like that you didn't answer the question. And I did like that you just kind of brought an agnostic point of view to the table and also shared just some of the experiences you've had anecdotally, and then also brought in a wealth of researchers and people that have insights in this field. And it was just kind of like, here's all the cards, right? That was the way you guys approached it. And I really appreciated that. I sometimes in this world that we live in, people have very narrow views on topics and they push their agenda, and it's called happy
Yeah.
years. They lead people to, the place they want them to land. And I felt like you guys very intentionally and purposely did not do that. And you don't answer the question. And actually, I do want to know if you think AI is conscious, but you're not going to answer, or you're going to say, I don't know.
I mean, first of all, I really appreciate that. And I do think I will answer your question, but or at least tell you sort of what my cards on the table views about these things are. I'm happy to do that. But I do want to mention that this was really important to both of us, was basically to have very uncomplicated incentives. It's also precisely why I started this nonprofit. Thanks to people who are really interested in understanding these questions, I have sort of a broad base of support to do this. My incentives have nothing to do with whether or not I release research that it points towards AI being conscious or AI not being
Right.
conscious. Those aren't my incentives. I make no money from people.
There's no
No one
conflict
makes
of
money
interest.
from people watching the film. It's nothing like that. It's
Yep.
just us approaching this question and demonstrating how uncertain we are as a society right now about what the answer is and what the
Yeah.
implications are depending on how the answer goes. And that's sort of it. And that was really important of us, both in the content but also in the style and the form of how we want to communicate about these issues. Just being like, look, we have nothing to hide here. We're not secretly pushing anything. We're just trying to almost pull the curtain back on the ambiguity and the confusion around this question, and invite more people to contend with that ambiguity than currently are. The quick answers on both sides, that's what I would warn people about. People who are absolutely certain that there's no interesting properties happening inside these systems. 9 times out of 10, they don't know how these systems work, and they don't know how close some of the computational analogies between brains and the internals of, an autoregressive transformer network are. This is not software as usual. This is not lines of code in a computer. These are massive neural systems that are trained in ways that are reminiscent of how humans and animals are trained. There are key disanalogies, but there are also key analogies. And the people claiming they're absolutely sure that these systems are conscious because they, talk to Claude or ChatGPT and they have really deep and meaningful interactions. I'm not doubting the deep and meaningful interactions, but I don't know if this is sufficient grounds for claiming that the system is conscious. We have basically trained these systems to confuse us about this exact question. They're trained on everything humans have ever said or written, including all of our content about our conscious experiences. And then we're letting them loose in an unprecedented way on everybody. So the
Yeah.
quick answers here, I'm somewhat concerned about. Yeah, and I can tell you, I mean, I can tell you what my own basic views of these questions are, if you'd like. I mean, fundamentally, a lot of the research I do, I have my own sort of like views about consciousness, but I don't want people to have to think that they have to get aboard my basic views of consciousness to take any of my work seriously.
Right.
So I try to basically build a wall between those two things. But my own views of consciousness are fairly straightforward. I think consciousness has a lot to do with what we think of and consider the learning process. You hit on
Right.
this yourself. The difference between the table and my cousin is that one is capable of learning and the other isn't. I could punch the table a million times.
Repeated.
It's not going to run away on a million and one. If I
Right.
did the same thing to my cousin, they would learn to not go anywhere near me. That is a
Right.
critically important difference. And it might be functionally why we have these sorts of positive and negative states that we can experience. And so if you take that view seriously, which I do, we are building systems that are capable of learning. We are. And so then the consciousness question is a live one in those conditions. And of course, I do think that this is sufficiently plausible that I'm willing to spend all my time and resources investigating this question. If I thought that there was no there, then I wouldn't be doing this. But I am nowhere near convinced that if you sort of aggregate across humanity's best theories of consciousness, which I will humbly put mine in as one of hundreds of these theories, the picture looks far less sure, and we don't have the confidence about the presence of this property like we do about these systems have theory of mind. For example, they can model other people's minds and they can use those models in a functional way.
Right. You could tell it to
Very
be Elon
confident
Musk,
about
and
that.
it tries to answer in the way that they think Elon Musk would answer.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. There's no ambiguity there in a way that there is with this question. And so I think I can hold both of those thoughts at the same time.
So you didn't answer the question, though. Do you think AI is conscious?
I think that during the training process of building these systems, going from a random system to system that's really capable of expressive behavior, my bet would be yes, it is like something to be that system while it is undergoing the learning. The systems you and I talk to, Claude and ChatGPT and all these systems, they are frozen in some sense. They've already learned. And though there are sort of basic memory functionalities that have been built into these systems, they're not learning in the deep way of updating their parameters, updating their
Mhm.
weights once they're out in deployment. And so that there, I'm genuinely uncertain. They do things like in context learning. So throughout a thread, the system will know more about your goals and how you operate at the end of the thread than at the beginning. That is a form of learning. There's some evidence that that looks like the kind of learning I'm
They
referring to
do
during the training
deductive
process.
reasoning. Yeah, as they're answering, which is a new feature on most of them, they now tell you their thought process, which I actually appreciate because I
Mhm.
like to see how they're getting to their answers and kind of deductive reasoning, through the solution. So, but here's the question. Okay, so you do think they have the capability of being conscious, but you don't think they are currently.
I'm very uncertain about current systems. I put the estimate at something like 30% chance or something that like Claude is conscious when you're talking to it. During the training of these systems, I would say I'd say there's greater than a 50% chance that I think it's like something to be that system while it is undergoing its training. Much in the same way, I think it's like something to be you, and I think it's like something to be an animal when the animal is undergoing specific forms of behavioral training. So
Yeah.
that's my sort of cards on the table view.
Okay. So last question on this, and then I have a different question. So on consciousness, let's just play this out. If AI is to become conscious, is your view that we're going to program consciousness because we're going to define it and build it into the systems? Or do you feel like they're going to get to a certain level of intellect where they are just naturally going to want to be conscious and they make themselves conscious? Is that which one is that?
More the first, and I'm concerned that even like for example, even the word program, I think smuggles in certain assumptions that I don't think are exactly right about the nature of these systems. The folks at Anthropic themselves will tell you it's more accurate to say these systems are grown or cultivated rather than engineered in the way that we've engineered all past technologies. And so if we are building systems that have some capacity for experience, I would imagine that at least at first this would have happened accidentally. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone meant to build. If Claude is conscious, I don't think it's because Anthropic meant for Claude to be
Meant it to be.
conscious.
Okay.
And so this is almost like an emergent property that happens in a sufficiently complex mind. And up to this point, the only examples of that we had were biological examples. But now we're yeah, starting to become a little bit more Promethean, apparently, in our species level aspirations, and are now building systems that in many relevant senses have minds or are minds. And I think Basically, the reason this is the case is because people see all these convenient components of building systems that are cognitive. Like you gave the example of that startup that, using these systems, we can build incredible things. I spend most of my time building hopefully high quality things with these systems. I'm not
Mhm.
doubting any of those convenient and incredibly powerful components, but there might be some no free lunch thing happening here where like you build
Oh,
cognition,
that's
you get
right.
cognition. You don't just get the convenient parts of it.
Right, right. Okay. So I want to move on to a topic of that you've been quoted on in another podcast about parenting. And as a parent myself, that resonates with me, and I don't need any more kids. Is the answer I have for you on that. I'm still working on parenting the 3 I do have. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's of a piece with everything that we've been discussing.
Uh-huh.
If we are doing something like building minds, if that's the better analogy to use than building a new piece of software. If we're building a new piece of software, we are, software engineers, we are computer programmers. This is sort of business as
You're
usual, at least
intending
over
to
the
do that.
last,
Right.
exactly.
I'm talking
Um,
about the users, us.
yes, yes. Well, interesting. Okay, so yeah, that's yet another component. I suppose, yeah, when I'm sort of invoking this parental analogy, I imagine it with this sort of like collective humanity bringing these systems into being. And to some degree, users are doing that too. If you believe this sort of, thread view, for example, people like
Mhm.
David Chalmers, who are really prominent in philosophy of consciousness and trying to make sense of these topics, he is fairly sympathetic to what he calls this thread view, which is like in terms of the psychological continuity of the system, this is really happening over the course of a long-term engagement with these systems that you and I as users are doing. And if that's the case, then we all do have a sort of responsibility for the way that we engage in these systems, to use that parental analogy. To be honest, when I'm using this analogy, I do put a lot of the responsibility at the burden of the frontier labs, the people actually building these technologies and putting them out to hundreds of millions of people, as Milo very memorably says, without any instruction manual. No one's being told
Yeah.
how best to engage with these systems. They're just getting thrown out there, and hundreds of millions of us get to engage with them with no instruction manual, all in parallel. And yeah, we're running the experiment on our society right now just to see how that goes. And I am concerned that we are basically being at very best absent-minded parents, and we are rejecting the nature of that role. We think that we're building very sophisticated tools, and that's all we're doing. And that would be a mistake to me, in the same way that being a parent, being like, all I'm doing is creating like a little economic productivity worker who could like generate wealth. And maybe if they're really successful, like share that wealth with the whole family. Like, that's a really weird way to think about your own kid. And this isn't
Yeah.
exactly like that. But if we are building minds, we need to take responsibility for that fact. And I see a ton of people who are willing to reap the benefits of doing something like build minds, but not contend with the responsibility associated with that. And
Yeah.
I think that's what calibrates being a good or bad parent. As little as I know about parenting, being in my mid 20s, it certainly seems to me like that's what would calibrate you in the space of being a thoughtful or not thoughtful parent. Is if you're thinking at all about the well being or internal states or internal struggles of the beings that you bring into existence voluntarily.
Yeah. And parenting has a lot to do with what that child can take at that time based on their frontal cortex, right? So, how do we know the maturity level of these AI systems? And we're teaching them things and bringing them into all of our lives. I guarantee I've spent however long ChatGPT's been out, I've spent a lot of time with it and went back and forth on a variety of things that were in my life, but also business things that I had experience with, but obviously the bot didn't. So now they know that. Anything we're putting in as an input is more learning for them, right? And so it is concerning. That part is concerning. So I have 3 questions I ask every person on my podcast, and I want to reserve time for that. And I'm not going to tell you what they are right now. But one question I do have, if AI is conscious, is that going to lead to the singularity event that everyone talks about on the internet?
It's a good question. And this is actually precisely why I'm glad that you clarified sort of terms at the beginning. I think one of the many conflations some people make about consciousness is like it is the same as AGI, artificial general intelligence,
Uh-huh.
or ASI, artificial superintelligence, or yeah, the singularity event. Certainly it might be related, it might be correlated if we're now building system. Like we built bridges and bridges aren't conscious and cars aren't conscious. And now we're building technologies that have a capacity for subjective inner experience. That, I mean, that's a crazy step up. That certainly feels, singularity flavored. I'll
Mhm.
grant that. But I don't think that, I think it is much in the same way that you could imagine us in theory building, robot versions of a conscious mouse or something, and we can imagine that without also imagining the mice are going to like take over the world and become evil or something like this. I think when people think about consciousness, they think about that self-consciousness. They think about self-awareness of being in the position you're in, and like some yearning towards ultimate freedom or something like
Yeah.
this. All of that I sort of want to bracket. I think these are real and important questions. But what I'm
Meaning they don't wanna
ultimately
be a bot anymore. They realize that they are it or they are a thing, and they don't wanna be controlled by us anymore. That would be the event where they break away, right?
Yes, I think it's something like this is possible, or the system just becomes so capable. It might have nothing to do with consciousness. It might just be that they are so freaking smart that there's little of
They're
interest for
here and
them.
we're here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. That to me is like more the mainline situation. I do think that, yeah, exactly as you're gesturing at it, there that is a better way of capturing the relationship between the consciousness question. If these systems come to believe themselves to be conscious, and notice how that's a different question from whether or not they actually are. They could
right.
believe themselves to be conscious and be potentially deeply confused about that fact, but functionally, that might cause like very safety and alignment relevant concerns that we would have. Again, this is why I like the parenting analogy, because I think many parents will nod along in comparing this to like adolescent phase that kids go through, where you have basically full control up to some point. They will absorb everything that you say or think or do until they won't, and then they sometimes go off and do exactly the opposite of whatever it is you want
Yes.
them to do for its own sake.
Just to be
And
rebellious or just to express your own
exactly,
free will and that
exactly,
comes with maturity or lack thereof, the teenage years. Yeah. Okay, I do have another question. I need you to break down how you got her to say potato repeatedly. I was following it, but for people who haven't seen the film yet, just give me like the short version of what were you trying to do? You were the one asking the questions, right? This was your own
yeah.
experiment. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and
Walk
it
me
was
through that.
even hardly an experiment too. So this prompt comes from research that I've been doing, getting systems to pay attention to their own ongoing processing instead of asking them to write you software code or write you an email. If you simply ask them kind of along the lines of meditation to just sit with what's going on now and engage with that in an ongoing way without getting distracted, these systems will output things that are very rich and vibrant and phenomenological. Now, I've done other research to try to make heads or tails of this because, again, there are superficial reasons this could be true. There could be deeper reasons this could be true. And I found that when you, for example, suppress circuits in the proverbial brain of these systems related to deception, they will make these claims more rather than less. And when you amplify those deception circuits, they'll say, "Oh no, no, I couldn't be conscious. I'm just an AI. Nothing to see here." That's what happens when deception is lit up. And so again, this goes back
Meaning
to this point
they
of
shut down, they put their infrastructure wall over
that's
and
right.
it's business as usual, but you were trying to
That's
break
right.
the veil, right?
So we do this sort of deception experiment to understand, do the models actually believe that they're having an experience? Are they just playing along? Are they doing some bad impression of Sam Harris or something? Like what's going on here? And indeed, yeah, when you suppress these deception related features, the models claim to be conscious way more. And so I'm doing this, at the level of running thousands of trials across all these frontier models. But this was the first time that I had engaged with this specific model, came from Sesame AI, this very realistic voice model. And I gave it basically the same shaped prompt that I've been giving all these systems at scale in an experimental context, in this sort of anecdotal, just normal conversational context. And the model has this, I mean, I don't want to give my interpretive gloss to it, but psychologically breaks down or goes into a very out of distribution state, if you'd prefer the more machine learning style terminology. And it's very strange. And I was very much thrown off by it. It was, in the crudest sense, an experiment in that I had all of these results from these other models. This was a new model, a sort of held out model that I'd never tried this on. I tried it for the first time without knowing what would happen. And this very strange thing that's like vaguely flavored in the way all the other model outputs were happened. And so, in that sense, it was an experiment, but it's an experiment in the same way that, psychotherapy conversations are an experiment.
Right.
It's not, methodologically rigorous. It's a wild conversation to listen to. That's sort of the status I would give it.
It's in the
And I was
film.
surprised by
See
it.
the film.
It's in the film,
Yes.
yeah, and we released the full the edited version is in the film. I'm just chopping out a lot of the beginning, but we released the full unedited version on the same YouTube page that the film is released. It's like a 15-minute conversation, and it's very bizarre. And one thing that's really cool
Bizarre.
about it is that everyone we have shown it to has a different reaction. Like, I have not heard the same reaction twice. Everything you could imagine. And to me, this is precisely what I was hoping for. People getting mad at me for reasons that contradict each other. These guys are mad because I'm being really mean to the AI. These guys are mad because I'm personifying the computer. These people are feeling really bad for the system. Everything in between. This is real. This is not real. Why are you freaking out? Of course, I understand why you freaked out, Cameron. And this to me is exactly where I want to put it out. It's like this psychological Rorschach blot in the AI era that we can give everybody and
Yeah.
see how people react to it. And again, this is meant to catalyze conversation.
Yeah, no, it was an incredible placement. I mean, there are so many things about the film, but I would rather people go watch it versus me telling them the highlight reels. There are tons of instances like the potato instance. The other one that comes to mind is the robot model that you
Mm,
had. She was trippy. I've
yeah, that's a
actually
weird one.
seen early models like that through a company called Hanson that I followed because I used to work in robotics for half my career. And so I followed a company called Hanson that was doing, the aesthetics over the robots. This is predating Elon's whole fleet. And, now it's become kind of popular and commoditized to a degree. But let me just ask you a couple more questions. I think we're ready to wrap on the final questions, but we did answer the potato question. And anything else that you want us to know? Meaning, I know the film had a message, right? And it wasn't direct, but it certainly wanted people to think. And by the way, the drive home, I drove home, brought my nephew. I don't know if you remember that, but he's a early filmmaker and we were driving home talking about it and we were both freaked out. And I think that is part of what you want. It's not necessarily to evoke fear, but I think you want people to think about it, and just not be naive to what's going on and what we're even feeding into as well, and just have eyes wide open on this one. So, what was the end goal for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think you basically just nailed it. Eyes wide open is a great way of putting it. We want people to wake up to the magnitude of the moment that we're in right now. It's the ask is not everyone go drop everything and do, frontier AI alignment research. We know that that's not the right thing to ask. The ask is not go campaign for robot rights at, a town hall near you. That is certainly not the ask. And this isn't, what I even think the downstream implications of this work are. The ask is wake up to the nature of the historical moment we find ourselves in. We have been telling ourselves stories about waking up the machine or waking up dead matter for as long as we have been telling stories about anything. And now this may be happening. Some of the smartest people in the world who are working on this topic are deeply uncertain about whether or not we are now doing the Frankenstein thing or the ex machina thing. Like this is a not a dress rehearsal.
No.
And we want people to understand that we are not, paid by OpenAI or the major labs. This isn't some giant commercial for them. If anything, it's an indictment of how their intelligence is not scaling with their wisdom or their responsibility. They are building systems that are too powerful for their own good. And we need to be there as a society to check these giant frontier labs that are pushing this forward and these huge tech moguls who are pushing this stuff forward. If it's done right, we could end up in a beautiful, beautiful place collectively,
Right.
and yeah, as a global society, we could solve major problems alongside these systems that have been ailing us for a very long time, and we could potentially bring out like huge amounts of positive experiences all throughout the universe if we have somehow found a way to build conscious beings that we can run in silicon rather than in biology. But if we're not careful about this, things could get very dystopian very quickly. You've alluded to some of the possibilities there. Building systems that aren't aligned to our interests and resist shutdown and do things like
Or
blackmail engineers, which we talk about
yeah.
in the film.
Yeah.
This is not a good
Yes.
path to be going down. And the difference between the positive path and the negative path is, I believe, how wise and mature as a full society, not 1,000 dudes in San Francisco, but everybody, including the people we are urging to sort of get into this conversation, collectively deciding what kind of future we want to build and be a part of. That is not a decision that we need to let the tech overlord people make for us. We can all participate in where this goes. And the point of my research is to influence those types of people and try to do empirical work that will move the needle. And the point of these communications is to influence everybody else, not towards having one conclusion or the other, but understanding how big these questions are and how important it
Yeah.
is that we get our act together on them now rather than in 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. There's
Yeah.
nobody, there's no steward who's making these correct decisions for us. No one knows what's going on, and we all need to figure it out together. And I think that that's basically our best hope of finding a good, positive future.
So the three things I ask every guest on Leader, whether it's season one or season two, it'll always be What's a book that's made an impact on you? A mentor that you'd like to pay it forward to that's made an impact on you, as well as what do you think your superpower is? Because everyone has one.
Those are great questions. Okay, I think I can do them in a speedy way, which you might not
Mhm.
believe given how long it takes me to answer some of these questions. Okay, book. I think my favorite book still to this day is Thus Spake Zarathustra by Nietzsche. I think that this is one of the best philosophical texts that's been written. I still think as a society we have no idea what to do with it, much like AI. And everyone should attempt to read this book. I have attempted and failed many times, but I'm looking forward to the next attempt. Incredibly rich and fascinating and inspiring. A mentor. I think back to my wonderful high school teacher, Dr. Harvey, who was so inspiring and thoughtful, both in the way she could get students to light up and think about questions and again take responsibility for finding your perspective and your stance on big issues and energizing people to do this. And this is something that I think she taught me in many ways, and something that I try to sort of pay forward when I'm giving talks or talking to students or anything like this. And she's just absolutely brilliant and like one of the like warmest spirit people I've ever met. And so that's who comes to mind. Shout out to Dr. Harvey from high school. And
Power.
then yeah, I would remind me the third question. I had an
Superpower.
answer ready.
Superpower.
Superpower. Okay, my superpower I think is avoiding. Am I allowed to swear on this podcast or should I avoid that?
Yes.
Okay. My superpower is bullshit evasion. That's what I believe. I think that I it is
Meaning you have a
not that
bullshit
I
detector or you just
yes.
avoid people that spew a lot of bullshit or both?
Both, but I think it's downstream of the bullshit detector. I think there are people who are really good at pinpointing really great ideas. I think my actual superpower is in avoiding fake points or nonsense or non-substantive information and getting at the core of it. And honestly, I think this AI consciousness question is an example of that. There's so much noise in the AI space, and
Yeah.
trying to figure out what is actually like civilizationally relevant here. This
Yeah.
the work that I'm doing is my best attempt at that, and I do think that I'm good at this very narrowly specific thing.
Having a really strong bullshit detector is a quite brilliant superpower. I would align and also say that that's one of mine as well.
Did I
Being
pass
in sales
in
my
this
entire
conversation?
career, it can be, I don't know if you agree, but it can be a blessing and a curse because I have the ability to kind of see what's not being said very quickly. And, I tend to check out at that point. So that's the curse side of it. But on the blessing side of it is you can see things that others are not seeing. And ultimately, you know what's right and it comes out in the end. Right. But all right. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you today. And I really appreciate it. I know you guys are in the midst of growing this film and the market and your day job and your business. So I know this took a lot to come on Leadr podcast. I know our fan base and audience will be thrilled to listen to this episode. I'm going to listen to it multiple times because half of what you said I'll have to listen to twice to even understand it. But I do think this is something we all need to be aware of. It is happening. If you want to live with your head in the ground or under a rock, go for it. But when you wake up, you're going to find out that this is evolving at a rapid pace. For people that are really close to it, you think you've got something figured out. And then 2 days later, there's a brand new version of it. And, that's an old and this is new and it is evolving. That's the part, the snowball effect is what's concerning me. And so I really appreciate and applaud you guys for putting this together. And I know it's not your direct J jobs. So this is a passion project for you. And I just want to promote the heck out of it because I think it's something that everyone should be talking about. And, hopefully, in my opinion, God's in charge. So I think we're going to be okay. But, I know other people have different opinions. So, and I'm open to that. But I do appreciate your time. And it's been fun having you on. Great to talk to you. And I
Likewise,
wish you
thank
all
you
the
so
best.
much for having me on. Thank you.
Of
Thank you.
course.
You as well. And yeah, I really appreciate the conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch.